The title of the Chang School Talks today is Experiential Learning in Action, and so they asked me to talk about what is experiential learning, to give you an example of what it is in action here at Ryerson University in the Entrepreneurship program, and to suggest that entrepreneurship is a good pedagogical technique for helping students learn a wide variety of different important things. When I first became a professor about 10 years ago, my friends all asked me, "Can you teach entrepreneurship?" I thought, oh, I hope so. I'm an entrepreneurship professor. Can you teach entrepreneurship? And I thought, well, if that's tough, how about all of the underlying subdomains of entrepreneurship? So, for example, can you teach students how to be curious and interested? Can you teach them how to be proactive and in charge of their own lives? Can you teach them to be creative or resourceful and get things done, or to work in teams and be persuasive and negotiate and have grit and perseverance and resiliency and deep empathetic understanding of customer needs and problems and things like that? And I thought, well, gee, I'm not sure if you can teach any of these things, but I've discovered over the years that students can learn it. And this is one of the biggest paradigm shifts in the educational field, is this shift from teaching to learning, or from teacher-centric teaching to student-centric learning. And in teacher-centric teaching, the source of information is the professor. The teacher knows all the answers. 1 and 1 equals 2. So I can tell you 1 and 1 equals 2, and 1 and 1 equals 2. Thank you, very good. She gets a C-. I had to help her a little bit. Students don't have to figure it out on their own. You can just tell them what the answers are. And the best way is sometimes to tell students, shut up and listen, and I'm going to tell you what the answer is. In student-centric learning, however, the students have to discover what the answer is. So an example is, one of my students is starting up a new women's clothing line, and she wants to know, what's the price of a pair of women's shoes? Well, I don't know. I've never run a women's clothing company. I've never bought women's shoes. Why would you ask me what the price of women's shoes are? I don't know. Go out. The answer's out there somewhere. But I don't have the answer inside my head. Big change in philosophy. In teacher-centric teaching, the appropriate pedagogical technique is often lecture. I know what the answer is. I just tell you everything. You just kind of regurgitate it back. In student-centric learning, students have to do experiential education or simulation or games or some other pedagogical technique to figure things out. On teacher-centric teaching, the appropriate assessment methodology is often tests, exams, quizzes, multiple choice, stuff like that. In student-centric learning, students have to demonstrate proficiency at the thing that we're trying to ensure that they're learning. Teaching's good for theory, learning's good for practice. We often call teaching the sage on the stage. Kind of ironic today, huh? In student-centric learning, professors are referred to as the guide from the side. So what does the professor do in this situation then? Well, the professor has to design what the learning outcomes are, what the assignment should be, and then crafts what the learning environment might be to help make that happen, and then provides that guide from the side or supports coaches and advises students. So there's 3 primary types of learning outcomes. There's the head, knowledge, and teacher-centric teaching is pretty good for this kind of thing. It's in my head anyway, I just have to get it out of my head and into your head. But there's also the hand, or skills. And this is much more difficult. Very often you can't do this. You can't just read a book about this. You have to get out there and do it and practice it. And of course, there's the heart, or attitudes. Now, you'll notice that for pretty much everything on that first slide that I showed you, those weren't knowledge outcomes. Those were skills, competencies, and attitudes. And so the teacher designs the learning environment around these things. So learning is enhanced when students care about what they're doing. It's enhanced when the experience themselves is deeply tied to something the students value. It is improved when the experience is situated within the student's social environment, also known as situated learning. And if there's peer support and peer learning, that helps it. And an emotional connection to the subject matter makes a huge difference. And emotional connections really deepen the neurological cognitive scaffolding, both positive and negative things. So there's several different types of experiential learning pedagogies, or learning by doing pedagogies. These include things where we send students outside of the classroom, we send them away for a semester. Go get a job somewhere as an intern, or go do a co-op semester someplace else, or go volunteer your time helping some people. Inside classroom type of experiential learning pedagogies tend to be things like interviews, field trips, simulation games, consulting projects, things like that. And what I'd like to suggest today is that entrepreneurship is an interesting pedagogical technique as well. So experiential learning in action, here's how we teach entrepreneurship here at Ryerson University. We're the largest entrepreneurship program in Canada. We've got about 15 entrepreneurship professors. We have 10 different incubators here on campus. The largest is the Digital Media Zone, but we've got 9 other ones on campus. We start up about 500 new businesses a year here at Ryerson University. And the entrepreneurship department promises our students that we'll give them a deeply experiential and transformative learning experience that will imbue them with this philosophy of entrepreneurship and passion and action orientation that they can apply to 4 different domains. They can apply this to their own lives, to their jobs, to their communities, and maybe their own ventures as well, and we ignite their passions. What this really means is that entrepreneurship is looking at the world not as it is, but as it could be, or as it ought to be. And that's not just a new service or product, but it could be maybe a new political cause, or a specific thing that students believe in. And to know that you can make it happen. You don't need your professor to make it happen, or your parents, or the government, or something like that, that you're in charge of your own life, that you can bring about this positive change, and you can take proactive action to make this happen. And so really, entrepreneurship isn't just about starting up a business. This is something more fundamental to the human experience. This is something fundamental to what it means to be a human being. The ability to envision a positive future, that eventually the snow's going to end, the winter is going to end, spring is going to come, and in the fall you can harvest seeds because it's going to get warm again, and you can bring about this positive future. So it's not just a business discipline, but it's really a way of seeing, thinking, and acting. And you can apply this, as I mentioned, to 4 specific domains. And we have assignments in each of these 4 domains in the department. So it could be to start up a new business or a venture. It could be being entrepreneurial within a company. That's called entrepreneurship. It could be social entrepreneurship. We call this change making. Or it could be seeing the opportunity to become a better human being. And you could be entrepreneurial in your own life for personal development and to become empowered. So really, entrepreneurship, this philosophy that we're trying to imbue in our students, is the most creative, freedom-loving, empowering force in the world. And we want to motivate our students with this philosophy. Of course, we've articulated our learning outcomes like every faculty would do. We have your standard knowledge-based learning outcomes, management tools like finance and HR, and these tend to be teaching specific type of courses. We teach entrepreneurship theory and entrepreneurial process tools, and we use all these textbooks here that I list. But all of the things on that first slide I showed you were skill-based or attitudinal-based learning outcomes that we're trying to achieve as well, too. And so we have specific assignments in each one of these learning outcomes that students have to demonstrate and give us on an actual document that we retain for accreditation purposes. And AACSB or EQUIS come in every year and they look at all of these, they audit us. You say students are going to learn these things, provide us demonstration of proficiency at each of these specific skills. You'll notice these aren't just entrepreneurial skills, though. Like who wouldn't want these? These are the skills you need for jobs in the new millennium. Engineers need these skills. Journalists need these skills. Everybody needs these skills. This kind of almost has nothing to do with entrepreneurship. We also measure attitudinal learning outcomes as well. Specifically, we want students to be in charge of their own lives, that their hands are on the steering wheel of their lives. They've got a high internal locus of control. They believe in themselves. Other people won't believe in them if they don't believe in themselves, and they've got grit, tenacity, and resiliency and things like that. We also measure what's called self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is basically for each of these skill learning outcomes, not only do we measure it as professors, but we also ask the students, how do you think you're doing? Do you think you're becoming good at these skills? And so students say, yeah, I'm not sure what my grades say, but here's what I think about my own self-efficacy. Now, there's a problem with measuring attitudes, however. The problem with measuring attitudes is the problem of overconfidence. Students may think they're amazing even when they're not so amazing. And so we can't just puff our students up full of hot air and say, oh, you're my special little snowflake. Yes, you are. You're all wonderful. You're the most valuable player. Yep, you didn't even show up for the team. You didn't take your hands out of your pocket, but you're the most valuable player. We can't just pump our students up full of hot air and then send them off to fail in the world. So they have to have reality-based self-esteem. And we want to make sure that their belief in themselves is in harmony with what their peers and their professors think as well, too. So not only do students rate their own capabilities, but peers rate each other as well, too. Okay, so here's what our entrepreneurship program looks like. I've mentioned it's a big program. In the first 2 years, they have mostly core courses, marketing, finance, accounting, stuff like that. We get them primarily third, fourth semester. I teach this top line here, the experiential core stream. So I've got my students for 4 semesters in a row. I've got them for a double semester class in 56 AB, and then again for another double semester class in fourth year. So it's great. I get my students for 4 solid semesters plus a summer in between, and to go through this experiential learning thing. So what do we actually teach them in this, or what do I teach them in this thing? So the first assignment here I'm going to talk about a little bit is related to the opportunity spotting learning outcome skill that we're trying to assess. So they have to develop a lifelong alertness plan. They have to analyze themselves and figure out, what do I care about? What am I interested in? I can't tell them what to be interested in. They have to figure that out for themselves. And then I can't tell them what to become an expert in. They have to go out and achieve some level of domain expertise on their own. And they have to do that outside of class and get involved in their local ecosystem through events. An example would be, for example, if you're trying to come up with a new business opportunity in the haircutting industry. Like, if you don't know how to cut hair, you're not going to be a good entrepreneur in the haircutting space. You have to know something about cutting hair. You have to know something about the problems that haircutting salons have in order to come up with a new product or service. So that's an example of a domain area of expertise. That yes, we're teaching students how to start up a business potentially, but not any particular business. They have to figure out what they're interested in. And then develop a portfolio of opportunities that are interesting things to them to work on. And again, as the professor, I can't tell them what to be interested in. They have to figure that out for themselves, and they have to come up with a deep, rich portfolio of interesting things that they can work on and develop some experience in finding and analyzing opportunities and ideas and problems and solutions and things like that. The second assignment is to start up a new business or venture or social change-making project of some sort and go through the entrepreneurial process. So here's what the entrepreneurial process looks like. They first have to understand what a problem is. They have to identify a specific stakeholder or community or user or customer, understand their problem, develop empathy with them, define a solution, craft that into some kind of a market offering, get a product market fit, and then scale it. We draw very heavily on 2 domains in particular, design thinking and lean startup. Here's what design thinking looks like. First, students have to identify a specific human being, not a market segment, not all men between the ages of 18 and 80, but you. I'm going to make your life better. I want to get my mind around you and your problems. I hope there's a lot of other people like her. I hope that there's a target demographic, but if I can't understand you, I can't understand a room full of you. And so it starts with this developing empathy around specific people's needs or specific people's issues. And you do divergent thinking. That's what this diagram is here. That the red thing is a set of divergent thinking techniques to try to develop empathy and understanding of what a possible customer or stakeholder's problems might be and develop insight. And then we go through a series of convergent thinking tools where students then better define what the problem really is. Once you've narrowed that down very specifically, we then go through another divergent thinking phase or brainstorming phase around ideation of what a different types of solutions might be. And then we go through the final convergent phase where we then prototype and test and deliver some kind of a solution to people. And then we iterate on this. This is what the learning environment looks like that we craft for our students. So we want a creative space that they can visualize and recombine information. So imagine you've got 4 or 5 students and they go out and they've interviewed, let's say, 15 customers each. That's 60 different people that you've talked about. That's a lot of information. You can't just write it down on a piece of paper or kind of sort of have it in your head. You have to get it out of your head and into a creative environment to share with your other team members. And there's a variety of techniques around getting these observations out and getting them onto Post-it notes and then manipulating the information and putting it onto 2x2 matrices or other different types of tools. It's a very fun, interesting, engaging, collaborative methodology for getting students to develop insights and understanding of the people they're trying to meet with. This is an example of 4 of my students at the DMZ. We then go through the lean startup process now that they've come up with ideas for solutions to actually build it, come up with a product, collect some data, and learn from that. Basically to iterate from a plan A to a plan that works. All these books, all these techniques that we're talking about are all within about the last 5 years. I don't think there's a single textbook that we have in the program that's less than 5 years old at this stage. Maybe Business Model Canvas might be 6 years old. What's important to realize about this is that stability for a little company is kind of like stability on a motorcycle. That when the motorcycle is stationary, it falls over very easily. Everything is a problem. Every little pebble in the road is like, oh, how do you get this beast over this tiny little pebble in the road? And you're trying to park your motorcycle, and it's really hard to move it back and forth, and it falls over, and somebody has to help you pick it up. But when you're moving fast enough, these wheels turn into gyroscopes, and nothing gets in your way when you're moving fast enough. Little pebbles, no problem. The Alps are in the distance. I can see them. I'll be on the other side of that mountain in half an hour. Competitor jumps out of the road in front of you, you're around that thing so fast you didn't even see it, or you just run right over them. When you're moving fast and you've got traction and momentum, people want to join your cause. But when you're sitting around, writing a business plan, nobody loves you. Nothing's happening. Everything's hard. It's only when you start moving that things become very easy. So the lean learning process looks a little like this. First, you want to capture your hypothesis with a business model canvas or a lean canvas or some other tool. Basically, it's a business plan on one page. How are you going to make money? Who are your stakeholders? Who are the decision makers? What are your channels? What are your costs? Who are your partners? Things like that. You then identify what the riskiest parts are and then create an experiment and go test it. So this learning process is really fundamentally deeply rooted in the scientific method. You're trying to understand the rules of the market. People talk a lot about, well, you want to make mistakes. These aren't mistakes. These are just experiments. I don't know what the proper price of a pair of women's shoes are. There's no mistake to be made here. Let's come up with the price. Let's get it out there. Let's see what people have to say. Let's learn from it. And then check a different price point, as an example. And this is really this power of this method over more traditional forms of entrepreneurship. Here's what this looks like in graphical form. You've got your canvas up here on the upper left, a series of tools. Students kind of sort of capture what they think their hypotheses are. They use these little green Post-it notes to say, here's what I think my riskiest things are. You prioritize them, design a quick test, capture your learnings, then make progress, then go back and iterate this process again. And we try to go through at least one complete learning cycle approximately every 2 weeks on average in the course. Now, students don't start off week 1 with this, obviously, but by the time they're getting into the second semester of this 4-semester-long process, I want to see something specific that they learned every 2 weeks. And then they have to document this in the final AACSB assurances of learning document against the specific learning outcome identified. An important point to mention here is that experience is not the same thing as learning. And I learned this the hard way, unfortunately, that students would come up to me after the semester was over and say, "Oh, wow, Professor Gedeon, you're great. I loved it. I learned so much." I'd say, "Great. What did you learn?" "Well, lots of stuff." "What specifically?" "Well, how to work in teams." "Really? What did you learn about how to work in teams?" "Well, a lot of stuff." I'm like, "Oh, man. If you can't explain it to somebody else, you haven't learned anything." Because eventually, if you're the CEO of your company, and you're telling your team, work better in your team, and they say, "What do you mean, boss?" Like, you got to be able to answer the question. You need to exhibit more leadership. "What do you mean by leadership? What is it that you want me to do?" And you can't just say, "Well, I don't know." So experience is not the same thing as learning. You have to transform stuff that happened to you into articulated ability to talk about it and describe it to somebody else. And so you need self-reflection assignments to do that. And we do these, again, not from the first week, but after the first semester, every week students create a self-reflective assignment that says, here's what I specifically learned this week about each of the learning outcomes that we're trying to achieve. We follow Bloom's taxonomy, provides a good structure. They have to identify specifically what the learning outcome was or what the expert script or the principle was or whatever, and then describe, analyze, synthesize, and integrate it, and then share this with their peers. So we've got an online blog that students can use some cool authoring tools and jazz it up and make it look nice, and then share their self-reflective reports with each other. And they get feedback on that. So some of the basic principles of the course is, first of all, we tell students, do something that you care about. I can't tell you what to care about. You have to figure out what you care about. Get out of the building and learn by doing. Be proactive and enthusiastic about it. Maximize your learning per unit time. Once a week for self-reflection, every 2 weeks for the lean learning, and to take charge of their own learning. And we try to make this into a transformative experience for students. And by transformative, I think for all the educators in this room, you know what I mean. Some students, the light bulbs are on. The eyes are open and they're engaged with the world. And some students are sleepwalking through their own lives. And sometimes it just clicks. And the students go through this transformative process where they go from the lights are on but nobody's home to they're in charge of their lives and they're making stuff happen. And it's the most wonderful, rewarding thing for a professor to ever see. At the end of the day, entrepreneurship is like playing the guitar. Yes, you need knowledge in your head of music theory and scales and things like that. But you never learned how to be a great guitarist by reading a book or going to watch other people play. You become a great guitarist by playing the guitar, by playing it till your fingers bleed and you develop calluses. And you have to have a song in your heart that you jam with other people and share with other people. You have to have passion about it. So I'd like to respectfully suggest that entrepreneurship just might be a cool pedagogy to learn all of these interesting things. And I've been working for the last couple of years with the Straschek Center in Munich, where we have 26 different professors in 13 of the 14 major faculties that teach about 30 different courses a year on entrepreneurship. But these are mostly engineers, and unemployment rate in Munich is almost zero. So none of these engineers want their students to start up new businesses. They don't care about new businesses. What they care about is they want their engineers to be curious and proactive and resourceful and grit and things like that. So they use entrepreneurship not because they care about the subject matter, but almost entirely as a pedagogical technique. So hopefully what I've shared with you today a little bit is about what experiential learning is, what we do here at Ryerson University, and maybe inspired you to use some of these techniques in your own experiential learning pedagogies. Thank you very much.